Good evening, my dear friends. As we gather here in this sacred moment, let us grow still, just for a breath, so we may touch that quiet presence that lives within us. Tonight, I want to speak with you about a teaching that seems simple, almost impossible, and yet spiritually liberating beyond measure. Forgive 70 times 7. Now, this is not a command meant to burden you, nor is it a moral scoreboard placed upon your shoulders. As Joel S. Goldsmith often reminded us, spiritual truth is never for the outer world. It is for the awakening of the one who beholds it. So forgiveness, in its highest sense, is not about setting another person free. It is about releasing your own soul from the chains of resentment, memory, and hurt. Tonight, we will discover why true forgiveness does not demand that another person change. It asks only that we return to our inner kingdom, again and again, 70 times 7 if necessary. But there is a deeper mystery hidden inside this teaching, a mystery most people never see, a mystery that just might shift the entire way you experience your relationships, your past and your spiritual path, and that is what we are about to unfold together. Before we dive in, my friends, if you feel the resonance of this message, like this video, subscribe, and in the comments share the symbolic number 777 to affirm your intention to forgive, release, and rise. Are you ready to explore the truth that forgiveness frees you, not the other person? Let us begin. And so, my friends, as we step gently into this first illumination, let us consider what it truly means when we say that forgiveness is an interior liberation, not an external correction. For most of our lives, we have been conditioned to believe that forgiveness is something we give to another person, a gesture, a moral act, a concession even. But in spiritual truth, as Joel Goldsmith so often pointed out, nothing in our experience is ever changed by adjusting the outer circumstance. The outer world is but a shadow of our inner state, a reflection of consciousness. And so the real work of forgiveness can never be about altering another's behavior, fixing their faults, or persuading them to understand our pain. That is the world of appearances, and the infinite never operates through appearances. Forgiveness, in the spiritual sense, is the movement of consciousness back to its natural state of freedom. When we cling to hurt, resentment, or memories soaked with emotion, we imprison ourselves in a cycle of reaction. We replay the scene, we relive the injury, and unconsciously we allow our inner sanctuary to be occupied by a presence that does not belong there. The person who wronged us may be miles away, living their own life, unaware and untouched, yet within our thought we have invited them to remain, to echo, to disturb the peace that is inherently ours. That is why true forgiveness is not aimed outward. It is the reclaiming of our own consciousness from whatever has taken hold of it. In the deep silence Goldsmith often dwelled in, he taught that nothing external has power over the spiritually awakened individual. The only power anything has is the power we assign to it through our interpretation. If someone speaks harshly to you, the words themselves are powerless. It is the meaning you attach, the story you build, the memory you nourish. These are the chains that bind. Forgiveness is the dissolving of that meaning. It is the quiet acknowledgement. This too has no power in the presence of God within me. To forgive, then, is to withdraw your consent from suffering. It is an act of spiritual sovereignty. It is the recognition that no human action is capable of diminishing the truth of what you are. When we understand this, forgiveness becomes less of a task and more of a natural return, like water flowing back into its riverbed. You do not forgive because someone deserves it. You forgive because you deserve to be free. And freedom in the spiritual sense is always an inner event. It does not wait for apologies, explanations, or resolutions. It does not depend on another's remorse or recognition. You could spend your entire life waiting for another person to change, and in that waiting, you trade your peace for their decision. But forgiveness frees you from that exchange entirely. It allows you to step out of the drama, out of the expectation, out of the emotional debt you've been carrying. It brings you back to your own center, your own peace, your own communion with the presence that has no memory of injury. This is why forgiveness is not an outer correction. It is an inner liberation. It is the releasing of your heart from the weight that was never meant to be yours. It is the moment you stop trying to shape the outer world and instead allow the inner world to remember its own light. And as we continue from this understanding, we naturally come upon the next profound realization: resentment is the only prison, and forgiveness is the key that opens its door. When we hear the word prison, we often imagine walls built by someone else, betrayal, harsh words, an action committed against us. But the spiritual view reveals something far more subtle and far more empowering. The prison is never built by the offender. It is constructed within our own thought, brick by brick, each time we revisit the wound, reinterpret it, or assign it new emotional weight. The bars are made not of what happened, but of what we continue to hold. Resentment, in its essence, is a form of self-binding. It keeps us tethered to the very moment we wish had never occurred. It anchors us to a memory that has long passed in time but continues to live in consciousness. And because consciousness is the only place where true experience occurs, we relive the pain as though it were happening again and again. The body reacts, the heart tightens, the mind replays the scene, and we find ourselves captive, not to the person, not to the event, but to our repetition of it. Joel Goldsmith often spoke of the invisible presence that lives within and through us, the presence that knows only harmony, peace, and infinite completeness. Resentment blinds us to that presence. It occupies the space within us where grace would dwell. The moment we cling to resentment, we shut the door to the spiritual flow that seeks to move freely through our being. In that sense, resentment becomes a barrier, a wall that divides our awareness from the divine peace always available to us. One might believe that holding resentment somehow protects us, that if we stay hurt, we stay alert, we stay guarded. But resentment is not protection, it is fixation. It binds us to the very energy we want to escape. Like a flame that needs fuel to burn, resentment consumes our inner strength, feeding on attention, time, and emotion. And slowly, often imperceptibly, it begins to define our thoughts, our moods, even our sense of identity. We begin to say things like, "This is just how I am," when in truth, it is simply how long we have carried the memory. Forgiveness, then, is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is not permission for someone to harm us again. Forgiveness is the unlocking of the door. It is the deliberate cessation of feeding the energy of resentment. It is the moment we stop identifying with the wound and return to identifying with the presence within us. In that moment of release, we discover that the prison was never external. The walls dissolve because they were made of thought, and thought can be transformed. Think of how many times in life we have replayed a moment, convinced that doing so would finally bring clarity, justice, or closure. Yet replaying only reinforces the bars. The clarity we seek comes not from analyzing the hurt, but from loosening our grip on it. The moment we release resentment, even slightly, we feel a shift, a breath of space returning to the soul, an uncoiling of tension long held in place. This is the first glimpse of spiritual freedom, and as that freedom deepens, we begin to see that forgiveness is not something we ever do, as much as something we allow. It is the soul's natural state rising once the weight of resentment is lifted. It is the recognition that the only thing ever keeping us confined was our own attachment to the story. The very moment we choose to let that story loosen its hold, even a little, the door begins to open. And from this quiet recognition that resentment is a self-constructed prison, we naturally move to the deeper rhythm embedded in the teaching itself, the realization that 70 times 7 is not a literal command, but a spiritual invitation to continuously return to inner peace. This phrase, often taken as an impossible demand, becomes clear when viewed through the lens of consciousness rather than arithmetic. It does not instruct us to count offenses or measure our patience. It calls us to live in a state of perpetual inner release. Every time the memory arises, every time the emotion stirs, every time the old story tries to reclaim its space in our thought, those are the moments we forgive again. This continual returning is not repetition in the burdensome sense. It is practice. It is alignment. It is the gentle, persistent turning of the mind away from the world of appearances and back to the presence that knows no injury. Joel Goldsmith often taught that spiritual living is not something we achieve once, it is something we maintain through continual remembrance. The mind is easily tempted by old hurts, conditioned responses, and emotional habits formed long before we were conscious of them. Therefore, forgiveness must be a living movement, fluid, ongoing, returning as often as needed. When the teaching says 70 times 7, it acknowledges the nature of human consciousness. It understands that emotional impressions, when deeply stamped, will rise again. They may return in weakened form or with surprising force, depending on the circumstance. But each time they rise, we have the opportunity to choose once more where we place our attention. Not on the injury, not on the offender, not on the past, but on the peace that stands eternally available within us. This repeated choosing is the true act of forgiveness. Notice that this spiritual return is never forceful. It is not suppression, denial, or pretending the hurt never occurred. Instead, it is a gentle redirection. It is saying, yes, the memory has appeared, but I choose again to release it into the greater presence within me. Each repetition loosens the grip of the old pattern. Each return dissolves a bit more of the emotional residue. Each moment of choosing peace reinforces a new inner pathway, one that leads away from bondage and toward freedom. Over time, this practice becomes almost effortless. The moment a painful thought arises, we recognize it for what it is, a shadow attempting to claim reality. And just as naturally, we return to the deeper truth of our being. In doing so, we discover that forgiveness is not merely an act, but a state of consciousness. It transforms from something we do to something we are. The inner peace becomes more familiar than the hurt ever was. This is why the teaching points us toward continual release. The mind must be reminded again and again of its true home. The heart must be guided back again and again to its natural openness. The soul must be allowed again and again to rest in the presence. This continual returning is not a burden. It is the very process through which we reclaim our freedom. And as we recognize that forgiveness is a continual returning, a steady reorienting of our inner life toward peace, we begin to see another profound dimension of this practice. The way releasing the past restores our connection to the presence. For the moment we cling to what has been, we step out of the living now, the only place where the divine can be felt, experienced, or known. The past is not merely a memory, it becomes a veil, a layer of mental noise that clouds the subtle awareness of the infinite within us. To live in the past is to live outside the flow of spiritual reality, and nothing disconnects us from this flow more quickly than rehearsed hurts and remembered wounds. Joel Goldsmith often taught that the presence, call it God, Spirit, the infinite, the I within, is always here, always functioning, always complete. It never withdraws from us. We withdraw from it when we allow yesterday to color today. The presence shines steadily, yet resentment, memory, what inner conflict become like curtains drawn across a window. The light has not vanished, it is simply obscured. Forgiveness is the drawing back of those curtains. It is the lifting of what blocks our perception. When we release the past, even slightly, the light of the presence begins to re-emerge into our awareness. This restoration is not something we force. It happens naturally, like the way clarity returns when a storm cloud moves from the sky. The moment we let go of our attachment to what was, we make space for what is. And what is, right here, beneath thought and emotion, is peace. When the burden of past hurt is carried within us, that peace becomes difficult to feel, not because it has disappeared, but because our attention is absorbed elsewhere. The mind can be full of either the past or the present, but not both at the same time. Thus, releasing the past is not merely an act of spiritual politeness, it is a reclaiming of our capacity to experience the divine. The more we let go, the more we discover that the presence was never absent. It was never silent, never distant, never withholding. It was simply overshadowed by our inner preoccupation. Forgiveness, then, becomes the practice of clearing the space within us. It is the returning of the heart to its native clarity. And with that clarity comes guidance, intuition, inspiration, the quiet, gentle whisper of the infinite that is drowned out by the noise of remembered pain. When we stop carrying the weight of the past, we become more available to the moment. We begin to feel the subtle movements of grace again, the way peace settles in the body, the way understanding rises without effort, the way compassion appears without strain. These are not things we generate, they arise from the presence itself, once the mind is no longer clouded by the residue of old experiences. And as this connection deepens, something else begins to happen. The events of the past lose their emotional charge. What once felt sharp now feels distant, almost irrelevant, not because we have forgotten, but because the memory no longer has authority over our state of being. The presence becomes more real than the pain ever was. The heart becomes more open than the wound was deep. The inner peace becomes stronger than the story that once defined us. This is the true restoration that comes from releasing the past. Not a forgetting of events, but a remembering of who we are beneath them. And as this restoration of inner clarity begins to take root, we naturally turn to a truth that can feel both liberating and challenging. Forgiveness doesn't excuse behavior, it dissolves your bond to it. This distinction is essential, for many resist forgiveness because they fear it sends the message that what happened was acceptable, justified, or somehow approved. But spiritual forgiveness makes no such claim. It does not rewrite the event, nor does it deny the reality that harm may have occurred. Instead, it shifts the place where the event lives, from the heart, where it injures, to memory, where it becomes neutral and powerless. To excuse behavior is to rationalize it, to bend your integrity in order to make peace with something that still feels misaligned. Forgiveness asks nothing of that sort. It does not ask you to pretend you were not hurt, nor to overlook what was wrong, nor to welcome back someone who demonstrated they cannot be trusted. All of that belongs to the outer realm of human relationships. Spiritual forgiveness moves on a different plane altogether. Its purpose is not to fix the world, but to free your consciousness from the emotional entanglement that binds you to the wound. Joel Goldsmith often reminded his students that the world of appearances, actions, personalities, behaviors, is secondary. The primary activity is always within consciousness. When you hold someone's behavior in your mind with bitterness, judgment, or emotional charge, you forge a connection, an energetic thread between you and that person, even if they are no longer present in your life. You carry them with you, not physically but internally, and that weight becomes part of your daily experience, subtly influencing your moods, your thoughts, and the level at which you can feel the presence. Forgiveness dissolves that thread. It breaks the bond, not by approving of what occurred, but by refusing to let the event define the atmosphere of your inner life. This dissolution is quiet, gentle, and deeply transformative. It often begins with the simple recognition that you no longer want the event to have power over you. You no longer want it replaying in your thoughts, shaping your feelings, or coloring your perception of yourself. Forgiveness becomes an expression of self-respect, an affirmation that your inner peace is more valuable than your allegiance to past pain. You release not because they deserve release, but because you deserve freedom. As this bond dissolves, something remarkable happens. Your clarity returns, and with it, a new perspective begins to arise. You may see the situation with more neutrality. You may understand the limitations of the other person, not to excuse them, but to recognize that their behavior came from their own inner turmoil, confusion, or unconsciousness. This understanding is not sentimental, it is simply a widening of awareness. You see more of the picture, and in doing so, the emotional charge naturally lessens. Forgiveness in this sense becomes an unwinding. It gently loosens the grip of emotional memory. It allows you to step back into your own center, where the presence rests, untouched by the drama of human relations. Once the bond of hurt is dissolved, you are free to respond from wisdom rather than reaction, from clarity rather than defense. You can set boundaries if needed, take distance if needed, speak truth if needed, and all without the inner storm that once clouded your vision. In this light, forgiveness is not softness, it is strength. It is not passivity, it is sovereignty. It is the quiet determination to no longer let the past borrow space from your present, nor let someone else's conduct determine the quality of your inner peace. And as we recognize the strength in dissolving the emotional bond to another's behavior, we arrive at a truth that stands as both the culmination and the liberation of this entire teaching. True freedom begins when you stop waiting for others to change. Much of our suffering persists not because of what happened, but because of what we continue to hope will happen. We wait for apologies that never come, for understanding that may never arise, for remorse that some people may never be capable of offering. And in that waiting, we hold our peace hostage. We tie our healing to someone else's awakening, someone else's maturity, someone else's transformation. When all along, the power to be free has rested quietly within our own hands. This waiting can become subtle, almost invisible. We may believe we have forgiven, yet still feel a lingering expectation that the other person should one day realize what they did, acknowledge the hurt, or change the patterns that caused the pain. But as long as we maintain that expectation, we remain tethered to them. Our emotional state becomes dependent on their behavior. We place our freedom on lie-away, hoping that one day they will make the payment that releases us. Spiritual truth calls us to something far more immediate and far more empowering. Freedom that is unconditional, freedom that does not rely on anyone else's growth or insight. Joel Goldsmith often emphasized that spiritual living requires us to withdraw our dependence from the world of form, including dependence on human conduct. People act according to their level of awareness. Some act from clarity, others from confusion, some from love, others from their own wounds. If we tie our inner state to their level of consciousness, we will ride the emotional waves of their inconsistency. But when we stand within our own awareness, rooted in the presence, we stabilize. We no longer need others to change in order to be at peace. We no longer set healing conditions based on external behavior. We simply choose freedom because freedom is our natural state. Letting go of the need for others to change does not mean we tolerate harm or remain in unhealthy environments. It means we no longer make our healing contingent upon their transformation. We can set boundaries without bitterness, walk away without resentment, speak truth without hostility. Our actions become clear and firm, grounded in the quiet authority of someone who is no longer entangled with the past. In this way, forgiveness becomes the reclamation of autonomy. It is the recognition that no one else has the power to grant or withhold your peace. Something profound happens when we stop waiting. The energy that was once bound up in expectation returns to us. The emotional atmosphere inside us lightens. We begin to notice that the person we were waiting on may not even have the capacity to give what we hoped they would. This realization is not harsh. It is freeing. It releases us from unrealistic emotional contracts. It allows us to let people be who they are without making their choices the determinant of our well-being. And in this space of acceptance, a deeper connection to the presence arises. We feel once again the independence, the wholeness, the completeness of our own nature. We see that our freedom is not granted by others, but revealed when we withdraw our demands upon them. What a relief it is to no longer need someone else's growth to validate our healing, to no longer postpone peace until they come to understanding, to no longer wait for life to unfold according to our script. True forgiveness opens this door. It lifts the weight of expectation from our shoulders and returns us to the infinite freedom that has been with us all along.